Welcome to Monday through Friday, Cellular Agriculture for a Pandemic-Free Future. My name is George Ortega. This is episode number 16, and we're recording at 2:05 p.m. on Tuesday, July 28th. So basically, we got into the morality a lot yesterday. And, sometimes I feel bad when we address that, because on the one hand, it's necessary to point out how wrong our behavior has been, for so long, for decades, how we treat these animals. On the other hand, like I make it a point to I guess to remind us, or to perhaps inform people that well, it's not really our fault. We're born into this world, and this is the way the world is. People have been farming and eating animals for decades, for centuries, for millennia, and so it would seem and I guess the problem is that for most of that time, the animals were treated relatively well. In family farms. Historic traditional agriculture wasn't all that cruel to the animals, whereas over the last 100 years especially, it's very different. All right, so but I want to just again go back to just the basic points, why it's important to do this show, this series over and over until hopefully people will appreciate these points, and it'll lead to certain necessary, very, very useful actions on the part of well, it would have to be on the part of everyone in the entire world. So the first point we have to acknowledge is that these pandemics are zoonotic. That means they come from animals, and whether it's a virus or bacterial pandemic, it's still And while this one came from wild animals at this wet market in Wuhan, there have been other pandemics that have originated, for example, in fact, in family farms. So, there's actually routinely, that we don't hear all that much about. But for example, several months ago in South Carolina, I believe, they had to euthanize about 30,000 pigs because there was an outbreak of a swine flu or something like that. So the point is that it's our contact with these animals. Before the domestication of animals, there really weren't pandemics like this. Because again, over 70% of infectious diseases are zoonotic. They come from animals. And now, in this world we live in, they become pandemics because we have about 4 billion passenger flights every year going all across the world. So if somebody goes to a place like China or Africa, they may be in Europe the next week and in the United States the week after. So it's extremely difficult to contain. So that's, but that's the first point, that basically these pandemics are coming from animals. And it's not just that, is that the animals, the way they're treated, the conditions under which we raise them now are so unsanitary, are so conducive to these outbreaks, there's other things we do, as we chop down the rainforest and we just clear land everywhere. It's not just in the Amazon, it's throughout the world. We encroach upon the natural environments, and we cut that down. And for example, bats are one of the major carriers of these pandemics. So they then will be much closer to civilization. Before, you know, there was much less contact that they would have with our domesticated animals. So like, you know, in a lot of these cases, a bat will infect a chicken or a pig. And so that's a problem. All right, so the second thing we really need to consider, and this is like a misapprehension that's been perhaps understandably been reported by the media and politicians. You know, people are, the media and politicians to a certain extent are trying to help people through this. So one of the things I've been saying is, well, you know, this is a 1 in 100 year event, okay? But it really isn't. It really isn't. You know, again, they're referring to the 1918 Spanish flu. That it, you know, it went from 1918 to 1920, so that's 100 years. But within that time frame, like for example, in 1957, there was actually a major pandemic in the world, and there was another one in '68, and then the AIDS pandemic in the '80s has killed over 20 million people. You know, that AIDS is a pandemic. It's a similar kind of contagious disease. So, and then, like, you know, what's worse is, like, in the 2000s, you know, these last couple of decades, the frequency of outbreaks have increased, you know, substantially and dramatically. You know, we've had SARS and MERS and Ebola and Zika and, you know, swine flu, avian flu, and that, you know, and again, this is like, they're increasing because there's much more farming going on, much more contact between people and farms. The farming is much, much less, you know, sanitary, you know. So, all right, so that's the second point. So in other words, like, we need to be safe from pandemics like this, and we need to change the way we do things in certain ways. So now the third thing is, like, people, one way, we essentially want to create a world where we don't have to worry about this happening again. That it really would be a 1 in 100 year, or, you know, God willing, 1 in 1,000 year event, or maybe we can put an end to it completely, which I think we can. But so in order to do this, there are only really 2 avenues available to us. The first is that we develop vaccines, you know, or a universal vaccine, let's say a universal influenza vaccine, a universal virus vaccine, a universal bacterial vaccine, that it doesn't matter what strain, you know, happens to be circulating, happens to be, you know, creating the problem of the present, that this vaccine would protect us, inoculate us from any and all kinds of these contagious diseases. That's ideal. But you want to know something? I'm not sure, from a religious perspective, I don't think God is going to allow us that opportunity, that gift, because, like, you know, we can't separate the religious component from what's going on. You know, in my understanding, you know, we do things right. We've done so much right in the world. You know, it's obvious to everyone that, you know, people live very, very good lives, and we've, you know, it's because people have worked really hard, you know, and for centuries, people have sacrificed. You know, people have, in a certain sense, earned, you know, very good lives. You know, for so many people. Again, we're living better than people have at any other time. Much, much better in terms of, like, less violence, less poverty, less infant mortality. People are living much longer, much healthier, just across the board, so many measures. So, but you know, just as we are rewarded by God for the good work we do, we are punished, you know, to the extent that, you know, when we pay people to abuse and torture these animals as a way of cutting the costs. They basically, these farms are created to basically have our meat products be as inexpensive as possible, and that's a goal that's profoundly contrary to the health and welfare of these animals. I've talked about this before. Chickens cramped into cages, 3, 4, 5, 6 of them. They can't even spread their wings. Female pigs, sows, in these gestation crates for months and months at a time. They can't even turn around. It's beyond horrible. So the idea is that, like, yeah, vaccines may be an answer to this, but two things. I've begun to do some research on this, and apparently these kinds of vaccines are at the very least 10 years away, maybe 15, 20. It's a very, very difficult problem to solve. All right, so vaccines are something that eventually I think they're going to achieve. By 2050, I would imagine that we'll have vaccines where we won't have to worry about pandemics because of vaccines. But before then, we don't want to live in a world where we're just dreading, the next time something like this is going to happen. And so there's only one option available to us. I mean, one, we can divide it into two. The best option, the most ideal option, the option that would please God the most and that would lead to the best world, not just for those animals, but also for us humans, would be for our entire world to go vegan, to just become vegan, to have this leap of conscience, to just as, like, for example, in the mid-1800s, we had a leap of conscience and we ended slavery. The abolitionist movement. It's just like it just like called upon our best selves, and we rose to the occasion and we ended it. It was a horrible institution. So we need a time like that. We need to summon that part of us to action in terms of, helping us to be the kind of people that God will continue to reward and won't have to punish, as apparently is happening with this pandemic. So, all right, so that's, I hope, and I'm going to, with this series, I'm going to try to move in that direction. Part of the difficulty is that, I personally, knowing the world as I do, knowing people as I do, don't have all that much confidence, that people would be willing to do that, and actually it's like, I don't think it's, for example, I just read recently that, the people hate, dislike the most, the second most. The first, I forget which is the first one, might be criminals. I'm not sure. I don't know who people hate the most, but the people who people hate the second most are vegans. And this is our problem, so why do people hate vegans? Well, because, a vegan will point out to whomever they're with, this terrible crime of how we treat animals. I mean, like, ordinarily people who eat meat, they maintain kind of like a blissful denial. They don't look at it, but vegans, call upon us. Even like, I'm a vegan, and like, I might eat in a restaurant with people who eat meat, and I'm not gonna say anything, at that time, although perhaps maybe I should, I don't know. But they know I'm a vegan, so like, it's a reminder. But so yeah, so like, I guess what I'm trying to say is that I don't, and I totally hope I'm wrong on this. I hope that maybe this pandemic is, chastening us, is punishing us in a way that is reforming, how we think of ourselves and how we think of ourselves in relation to these animals. But, worst case scenario, that doesn't happen for a while, and I believe it will happen. I believe probably by 2050, there will be very few carnists on the planet. But all right, so for the time being, very few people will go vegan. So what do? How do we stop farming animals and continue to eat our meat? That's what this series is about. I don't think it's a coincidence. In 2013, 6 years before this pandemic, a researcher from the Netherlands, Mark Post in London, premiered the world's first cell-cultured hamburger, creating hamburger patties. He created 3 of them in a lab through a technology known as cellular agriculture that involves absolutely no animal cruelty. All they simply do is they take a biopsy the size of a grain of rice from an animal. It could be painless. It could be from, for example, with a bird, it could be from the feather of a bird, because they just need these cells. And then they just trick the cells into believing they're still in the animal. They feed them this growth medium, and the cells do what cells do. They just multiply. They become more and more. And so I don't think it was simply a coincidence that this amazing technology was demonstrated. It was a proof of concept demonstration, just 6 years before this happened, because basically this is our opportunity. In other words, like what I'm saying is that we have the means within a few years to buy all the chicken, beef, pork, seafood, dairy, eggs that we want, and not harm any animals in the process through this technology. Right now there are about 40 or 50 startups that are working on some research challenges to scale up the technology. They have to be able to solve certain engineering problems for the bioreactors. They're kind of fermentators, like breweries. They're, the way beer is brewed or yogurt is made. They don't have yet the scale of the machines, of the equipment that's necessary for this. There are several research challenges in terms of the media, the food that these cells are given, and it's a brand new field. So here's the problem: 40, 50 startups combined. They're working with about $1 billion. Bill Gates has contributed to this. Sergey Brin, who actually just funded those first 3 patties. Sergey Brin is one of the co-founders of Google. People are investing in this because they see the utility. But at the rate of, 1 billion may seem like a lot of money for this research, but at this rate of progress, I've spoken to some of the industry insiders, some of the CEOs of this industry, and they predict that it may actually be 10, 15 years at the current rate of funding that we're able to solve these research challenges, that we're able to scale up the production so that these products can be in our supermarkets. So this series is about, the last point is that, well, if we continue, with the business as usual scenario, the status quo of however much money is being invested, every month or every year in this industry, we will be unsafe from pandemics for the next decade. And we may not, I don't think we've been very, very lucky recently. I mean, I think our luck ran out when Trump became president. A person so vile, so without, conscience and empathy to be leading this country. That's exceedingly unfortunate. And then like to be plagued with this coronavirus, 3 years later. So we haven't been that lucky. And so like, I'm not sure it's wise to hope that, God willing, we emerge from this distancing in a year or two. We will be free from pandemics until a vaccine is created, or until these lab-grown cell-based meats are available in supermarkets in 10 or 15 years. We may not be that lucky. And this is way too important of a risk, of a threat to our well-being, for us to not do everything we can to protect ourselves against it. So again, what I'm proposing, an analogy with vaccines. Vaccines generally take about 10 years or longer to create. The fastest one that has ever been created was to address the 1957 pandemic, and that took 4 years. Okay, we're fast tracking this, and what generally takes 10 years or 4 years in that case, we're going to try to do in about a year. And I believe we'll do it. Basically, we're pumping so much money into this research. So many more researchers are involved in the work that we're fast tracking everything. So my point is that if we can do that, with vaccines, with getting these vaccines, we can do that with this cellular agriculture research. We can do that to fast track the research on clean meat, cultured meat, so that rather than having to wait 10 for 15 years for these products, we can have them on supermarket shelves in 2-3 years, perhaps. What I'm suggesting, I suggested initially, I started, advocating for the release of $10 billion, which seems so much, like, for additional research. But then I was thinking about it, and that seemed too low, considering, we've spent we're predicted by the Congressional Budget Office to spend about $8 trillion on this crisis, right? So I figured, like $50 billion would be, to be released immediately to really fast track this research would be the wisest, most prudent thing we can do. And for those of us who think, well, that is so much, that's too much, consider it's only 0.5% of what we're predicted to spend to address the harm that this COVID-19 is doing to our economy, to our health. 0.5%. Okay, and I guess the last point relative to that is that, if you want to compare it, homeowners insurance, a person who buys a home, they will pay in annual premiums over a 10-year period, about 4.5% of the value of the house, of, the home, the property. So, I mean, and the point is that, homes are rarely lost to fires and theft and these kinds of things that are insured against. These premiums really are for peace of mind about something that's very, very unlikely. Whereas future pandemics, as the experts have been telling us, are not a matter of if, but when. It's something that we know will happen unless we do something. So from that perspective, it just makes consummate sense to spend this money to scale up the research. And if you're watching this, talk to your friends about it. This is an ideal time to get this done. We're fewer than 4 months away from a national election, presidential election, and everybody's attention, you know, would, people are suffering, people are distancing, people, you know, if, you know, it may be too early for people to really begin to think of, well, you know, how are we going to protect ourselves from this ever happening again? But I think, you know, I think people would value that kind of expectation, that kind of hope, that kind of realization that if we do this, if we invest $50 billion, you know, in this research, in a few years, we can have a world where we can be, you know, essentially pandemic free, you know, pandemic risk free. You know, that's what this industry holds for us. And again, from a religious perspective, we're earning this protection because we're becoming much better people. We're stopping, we're abolishing the abuse and torture of these sentient beings that, you know, sometimes people say, well, they're just like animals, don't really suffer. But anybody who, for example, has owned a dog knows that dogs certainly suffer. And a lot of people don't know that pigs actually are smarter than dogs. So they obviously suffer. And you know, we know cows and chickens suffer. I mean, so to end that suffering, you know, would be a reason for God to reward us, for God to allow us to continue creating a better and better world where people are much happier and healthier, you know, where we end wars and we end poverty, and we just like bring people together in ways that have never happened before. I mean, again, the world is pretty amazing now, but it's probably nothing compared to how it can and will be, you know, once we start doing, and I believe we will, once we start doing what we need to do, you know, in terms of these animals and in terms of other issues that are affecting us. All right, I'm running out of time. So catch this Monday through Friday at White Plains Community Media, channel 76 if you get Optimum, Altice, or channel 45 if you get Verizon, and I upload the episodes to YouTube. So, all right, I hope you're having a good Wednesday. I will be back again tomorrow. I've got to dig up more facts for you. You know, I think, you know, you can Google what I say and you know, find evidence from experts, you know, from authorities. But I'm going to try to bring you more information to let you know. All right, so thanks for watching. I'll see you again next time.